Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to episode 3 in a 5-part series on communication in a marriage. In the first episode, we talked about how to artfully enhance communication through body language and asking questions. In episode 2, we talked about reflective listening, what it is and how to do it so you're able to understand your partner when they're communicating something to you. In this episode, we're going to talk about what happens when communication breaks down, when it fails and when it fails drastically. What are some of the ways that it can fail and how to avoid some of them? So it's obvious that when it comes to any relationship where emotions and tensions can get high, sometimes the worst of us will come out. And marriages are a place where we see this very often. And even though it's unfortunate, it's a reality. And so to prepare for that reality means knowing what the risks are and having red lines, making sure you don't ever overstep these boundaries when it comes to you and your partner. So, what do we call this technique of ensuring that you're able to limit the really horrible things that you might do during conflict? We call this fighting fair. So fighting fair is exactly what it sounds. It recognizes that even when you are in an argument, even when there is conflict, there are certain ways to maintain fairness so that you're communicating what you want to communicate, but you're not hurting the person that you love in the process. Or if you do hurt them, you're minimizing hurt. So, one of the first red lines that is really important to think about when you are in an argument with your spouse is to rule out any opportunity that you have to name call your spouse. And name calling in any sense of the word, whether it's a very simple, you're a jerk, you're stupid, you're this, or cuss words or really dramatic insults in your language if you speak another language, let that be a red line, that you don't name call. And if you find yourself ever getting to a point where you're getting there, where you are name calling, it's time to step back and recognize that there's a part of you that doesn't respect your spouse in the way that you should. And so that's a reflective moment for you. That's something that you really have to step back and internalize and realize, where did this loss of respect come from? Especially when you made a promise in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this person, whether it's your wife or if you are the woman and this is your husband, you promise to take care of them and to do right by them and to be just towards them. You promise this in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's the first red line that's really important to not cross, is avoiding name calling. As soon as names are called, the respect is completely deteriorated in a relationship, and there's a very low chance that the conversation is going to end up being productive. In fact, you already hurt someone. Now, if that person is really great at communication and regulating their emotions, maybe there's still some opportunity to rectify what just happened, but you don't want to even have to get to that point at all. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is really understanding how important it is to regulate your emotions during a heated argument. If you feel like you are flooded with emotion. And what does this mean? It can mean very different things for very different people. And I think one of the best things you can do is really pay attention. And I know it sounds simple, but a lot of people don't do this. Pay attention when you're feeling overwhelmed. What happens? The most common thing that's gonna happen is you're gonna feel your heart racing. But other things happen for other people. You might feel certain parts of your body going numb or getting tingly. Your arms, your hands, your feet. You might notice that you feel very flushed or very hot. You might notice that certain things start getting blurry. During this time, the amygdala or the fight or flight part of your brain is very highly active. So it's no longer balanced in paying attention to everything around you. It's hyper-focused on this idea that you're in danger. And so if you can recognize what those things are, you can recognize when it's time to hit the red alarm. What is a red alarm? The red alarm is something that is basically a technique of pausing conflict when things are getting too heated, to recognize that the two of you need to separate, have some time alone to re-regulate your emotions, to get yourself to come down off of that fight or flight staircase and come back to the conversation later when you're more level-headed. This technique only works if both people know that the technique is something that can be utilized, both people respect what it means, and both people adhere to it when it happens. So this means that during a conversation, you say something like, I'm hitting the alarm button, or I'm ringing the alarm. If you're in a text fight, then you can text the alarm emoji, or anything of that sort that will indicate, hey, I'm getting really overwhelmed right now. I don't think I can continue in this, but I'm promising we will get back to it. Maybe you can discuss later, or even give a timeline then and there of when to get back to it, but you do have to promise to get back to it. So that is something that is extremely important when it comes to fighting fair. The last thing I will say is recognize that when you are having a conflict, what is a conflict actually about? Notice at any point when the conflict shifts from, here was a problem that we had, whether it's let's give an example. You are frustrated because you feel like your spouse is constantly late to certain events and you don't feel respected when it happens, and this is what the fight becomes. So you started off bringing that issue and your partner got really defensive and it was hard for them to level with you and reason with you. And then they say something to you that's insulting. Now the fight shifts because you started focusing on the fact that they said something insulting. So now it's no longer about what you initially brought forth, but it's more so about how the fight is happening. That is really, really dangerous because it automatically leads to this circling and this cycling of focusing on different things, aspects of the fight, and then you forget about what you guys actually were arguing about in the first place, and then you feel like there's no way to find a solution because 1,000 other conflicts, mini conflicts, came up during that conversation. You have to be able to withhold the urge to fight about the fight itself. And recognize if certain things like that do come up, you can log them in the back of your head and recognize, hey, maybe this means that we need to be able to have a conversation about fighting fair later on, but I still want to focus on this specific issue. How do we come to a solution when it comes to that? This is so much easier said than done. There are plenty of resources when it comes to fighting fair. You guys can even do a quick Google search. These are just some of the things to think about. So obviously avoiding name calling and having your red lines that you just do not cross. Working on emotional regulation, noticing what those triggers are for you, what happens to your body, and knowing when to sound the alarm or hit the red alarm. And the last thing being is avoiding focusing on the fight itself. I hope that this was helpful for you guys and it gave you just a little bit of insight into how things can go wrong in communication and what things you can do to prevent them. Snarl.